Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here with the final part of my 2022 reading wrap-up, and that is the best YA and middle grade books that I read last year. If you want to see my full reading wrap-up, I posted that video last week. It's just 2022 reading wrap-up, and I also have separate videos for my favorite adult fiction and my favorite nonfiction of the year. So you can check those out as well. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. Many of these I listened to on audio, so I don't have the books anymore. I'll put pictures up here so you can see what I'm talking about. And some of them were from the beginning of the year, so my memory may not be great in terms of things like character names. So I'll just give you a quick overview of each of my favorite books. So we'll start with teen young adult books. I actually only read 6 of those last year, which is pretty low for me. I normally read more YA than that. So of those, I chose my top 3 YA novels. First up is Kent State by Deborah Wiles. This is an amazing book. And I chose it as my number 1 YA novel last year. It is historical fiction, quite obviously about the Kent State shootings in 1970. This was an incredibly powerful book. Deborah Wiles often writes middle grade books, usually historical fiction. Her 60s trilogy for middle graders is wonderful, highly recommended. This one, though, is definitely for young adults. It's very emotionally powerful. What she's done is told the story of the Kent State shootings from multiple perspectives. And this was especially effective on audio, with different voices doing each of those perspectives. So she's got other college students who knew the kids that got shot, college students who were protesting that day, townspeople from the surrounding town who were scared by what was going on, one of the soldiers, one of the National Guardsmen who was there that day. I had to keep reminding myself that it wasn't nonfiction. And obviously, she did a lot of research and based it on fact, but it just comes across as so real life, especially on audio, with each of these characters telling the story from their own perspective. Absolutely wonderful audiobook and YA novel, and definitely recommended for adults as well as teens. Next up, my next choice for best YA of the year was Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazamian. This was just a really moving YA novel about, it was set in the 80s in New York City during the AIDS crisis. And it's about 3 kids they're in high school, they're trying to figure out who they are and what their path is in life. But at the same time, the AIDS crisis is going on all around them. So it's about a very out and proud gay boy who has accepted that he is gay, and his parents know it, and everybody at school knows it. He's the only obvious gay kid in school at that time. His best friend, who's a girl whose uncle is gay and is dying of AIDS, and his partner has already died of AIDS. So they're both very close to her uncle, and which brings them right into the center of what's going on with the AIDS crisis. And then the third character is a new boy in school. He is Iranian. His family's new to New York. He is gay but hasn't admitted it to himself yet. And of course, in his culture and his religion, it is absolutely taboo. So it's about him coming to terms with his identity. It's about the girl dealing with her uncle's impending death. So it's about those 3 characters set in that time and place. It's a very moving story. It's also got humor in it. I just really enjoyed it. I listened to it on audio and was just totally immersed in their world. And my final choice for Best YA of the Year was A Light Too Bright by Sam Miller. This was a really unusual novel, and I really enjoyed it. I didn't actually know it was YA when I listened to it. I've got a huge backlog of audiobooks on my laptop, and, downloaded it for Big Book Summer, actually. And it was only later when I was writing my review and looked it up that I realized it was actually YA. It's about a boy who is 18. He is going through a rough time. In a very short time period, he lost his girlfriend, he lost his best friend, he lost his beloved car, and he and his dad have gone to live with his aunt and uncle for the summer, I think in Iowa. And then his grandfather had died 5 years before, and he was close to his grandfather, but his grandfather had pretty severe dementia. And his grandfather was a famous writer, kind of a J.D. Salinger type character who was somewhat reclusive. In his case, he wrote only one novel that was like such a hit, it was still being taught in high school, but never wrote anything else. So while he's staying in his aunt and uncle's house, he's in his grandfather's old room, and he finds a journal his grandfather wrote. And he wrote it while he had dementia, so some of it is kind of almost poetry, kind of stream of consciousness type stuff. But within that, the main character finds some threads that he decides to follow. So most of the novel is this kind of road trip, only by train, where the grandson is following in his grandfather's footsteps. And as it turns out, following in his grandfather's last footsteps on the trip that his grandfather took before he died. So there's a whole lot to this book. It is about family, it's about friendship, there's a little bit of romance in it. It's about him, the main character, figuring out who he is and how to move forward from this bad place that he's in. And it's about his grandfather, like reaching back across the generations, across time, through his writing. It's just a wonderful novel. Really enjoyed A Light Too Bright by Sam Miller. I read a total of 13 middle grade books last year, and I chose 7 for my top reads. These are in alphabetical order. And again, I know I'm not going to remember all the details. I'm just going to give you a quick synopsis here. Behind the Mountains by Edwidge Candicat. This was a novel set in Haiti, and it really stuck in my mind because of the incredible setting, a setting that I was not familiar with. It begins with a 12-year-old girl who lives in rural Haiti up in the mountains. Her father has moved to New York to get a job and send money back to the family because it's hard to make a living as a farmer in the mountains. So she's helping her mother and her older brother with the farm. Her older brother's going to school down in the city. Her mom and her end up in the city and eventually also immigrating, the three of them, to New York to join her father. So the first half is set in Haiti, part in the rural area and part in the city where violence is increasing. And then the second half of the novel is set in New York, her experiences as a new immigrant. So really recommend Behind the Mountains by Edwidge Candicat. Next up is Booked by Kwame Alexander. This one I got from the library. It was a graphic novel, and I've read only one other Kwame Alexander book before. I loved this. It came out my top graphic novel of the year and made my best of list for middle grade. Just a wonderful novel. about a young boy. He's dealing with a lot of things in his life. It's about family and friendship. But what's really special, as usual with Kwame Alexander, is the way the novel is written. And in graphic novel form, it was even more powerful. Much of it is written in verse. There are different font types and sizes. I wish I had it to show you, but it was a library book. And it's very, very clever. From the title of it, Booked, to the boy's father is an English professor who is always teaching the boy unique new words. So that's integrated into it as a part of the novel. Just a whole lot of fun, but with plenty of emotional depth too. And the wordplay is just so fun and clever in Booked by Kwame Alexander. Dennis Ever After by Tony Abbott came out on top as my #1 middle grade book of the year. It's actually about a young boy who is a ghost and who is trying to communicate with his twin brother who's still alive because his family is not dealing well with his death. And he was kidnapped and murdered. So there is also a mystery involved. And he's been gone for, I think, 5 years now. And when he does sort of move back across the barrier and look in on his family, he is really dismayed to see that they haven't moved forward, that they're all still really stuck. So he kind of crosses over in a way so that his twin brother can see him or can communicate with him. And they go about solving the mystery of his death so that his family can have some peace. This novel was just, I listened to it on audio, was just so unique and so engrossing. I loved the picture they painted of the part of the afterlife where the boy is, this sort of, interim limbo kind of place. It had a beautiful name. It was like on the ocean. He got to know his great-grandmother there in the afterlife, and also about him communicating with his twin brother and then them coming together to solve the mystery of his death. Wonderful book. That's Dennis Ever After by Tony Abbott. This is the one book I do still have around to show you. It's The National Parks, Preserving America's Wild Places by Fallen Cook. It is part of the History Comics series, which I love. If you've been watching my videos, you've seen this book quite a bit because it came up as one of my best nonfiction books of the year as well. Wonderful graphic novel, perfect for middle graders. The whole history series, History Comics series, is great for middle grade readers. It's educational, but a whole lot of fun. So this gets into, in a very fun way, the history of the national parks, how they were developed and founded. It looks at the Native American side of things, which is refreshing. So it deals with some difficult issues here, some of the infighting that occurred between industry and preservationists. But it does it all in a fun way that's great for kids. And my husband and I both enjoyed it too. Another of my favorite middle grade books last year was a new series by Margaret Peterson Haddix called The Mysteries of Trash and Treasure. And the first book in that series is called The Secret Letters. Now, I'm a big fan of Haddix. I always enjoy her books, really enjoy some of her science fiction. This is not that. This is realistic fiction about two middle grade age kids. I think they're 12 in the book. There's a boy who's got a single mom. She runs sort of a Marie Kondo type business, helping people get rid of stuff and kind of collate the things they want to keep and find joy. And the girl in the story, her father is known as the junk king in town. And she and all her large number of siblings all help out in the family business. So their parents are kind of in the same business, only different approaches. Their house is filled with clutter because their dad is always finding things he wants to keep. He helps people clean out their houses as well, but with a different approach. And the two of them meet during the summer. But their parents are rivals, so they kind of try to keep that secret. And the boy, I'm sorry, I don't remember the character names at this point, but the boy finds a shoebox full of old letters written in the 1970s from one 12-year-old friend to another, also male-female friends. And so the two of them kind of see themselves in these old letters. And they kind of end with a mystery. I think it was the girl, the boy was away visiting his grandparents for the summer. That's why they were writing letters. And then the girl moved away at the end of the summer. So they never saw each other again. So the modern day kids go about solving this mystery, finding the adults that these kids grew up to. There's so much to this story. It's historical fiction. Yes, I hate to admit it, but the 70s do count now as historical fiction. And all the 70s references from pop culture to politics to everything that was going on in the world at the time are sprinkled throughout this. And she includes a glossary for kids, which I found amusing. So it's historical fiction, but the kids are both dealing with issues in their own families. So it's about family drama, about friendship, obviously. It's a wonderful book and a great start to the new series, The Mysteries of Trash and Treasure. And this first one is The Secret Letters. Another of my favorite middle grade novels was Ruby Lee and Me by Shannon Hitchcock. I read this one back in February for Black History Month. Really enjoyed it. I don't have it anymore to show you because I put it in a little free library that is frequented by a lot of kids. I was hoping a child would find it and enjoy it as much as I did. It is set in the 1960s, I believe, in the South, and it's about, there's a white girl whose sister is badly injured in a car accident and spends much of the summer in the hospital. So the little girl goes out to her grandparents, which is outside of town, more rural on a farm, for the summer. Now her best friend out there in the rural area is the black girl next door, Ruby Lee, and the two of them get along great all summer long, as they always do when she visits her grandparents. And her grandmother is best friends with Ruby's grandmother. But what she can't understand is why they act differently in town around people, why they can't be friends when they're in town. And the main character, the little girl, ends up starting the school year, it's still at her grandparents because her sister's still in the hospital. So she's so excited to start school with her best friend Ruby, but you know, things at school, of course, are very segregated. So, in fact, I think it is the first school year that this town has desegregated their schools. So it is a single school, but the kids still don't interact much with each other. So it's all about, of course, racism and discrimination. It is historical fiction, and it's also a beautiful story of family and friendship. So Ruby Lee and Me by Shannon Hitchcock. My final choice for my 7 best middle grade books of 2022 was Set Me Free by Anne Claire Lazat. Many of these I read or listened to during middle grade March, a challenge I did here on booktube. So then this was one of those. I should have looked up the details before I started here. It's historical fiction it's either the 1700s or the 1800s in Massachusetts. There is, and this part was true, there's a deaf girl who's grown up in a deaf community on one of the islands. Again, I should have looked this up. This is actually true life. This is actually real life in history. There is one of the islands off the coast of Cape Cod and Massachusetts where there was a large population of deaf people. And they kind of, long before American Sign Language, developed their own sign language. And so this girl has grown up here. She's very much supported in the community, which she might not have been elsewhere. And she travels across the ocean over to the mainland to help a young girl who is also deaf, who has not been treated well. And so it's all about one deaf girl reaching out to help another before the days of American Sign Language. But she's got her own sign language that she wants to teach to this girl. There's a whole lot more to it. There's a little bit of a mystery there, but it's mainly historical fiction, but with this totally unique angle that I knew nothing about, which of course is the best part of historical fiction, reading about and learning about these new little pieces of history that you didn't know about before. So very much enjoyed Set Me Free by Anne Claire Lizotte. Those were my top 7 middle grade picks for the year. I want to hear what you enjoyed last year. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite young adult or middle grade books were for 2022.